So today we're learning about factoring by grouping. So when you have four terms, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 terms right there, you may need to use the grouping method. And what we're actually doing today is undoing FOIL or double distribution. So if I was actually going to FOIL this problem, these two things are really the same thing. Those two multiplied to give me 3x cubed. Those two multiplied to give me 5x. Those two give me the 6x squared, and the last two give me the positive 10. Now, how we're actually going to undo this is breaking it into two different problems. So I'm just going to start off with the first two terms and take out the greatest common factor. Whatever you have remaining goes inside the parentheses. Then you're going to do the same thing to the second two terms. Greatest common factor is 5, so I divide that out. Whatever is inside the parentheses is what's remaining. Now, the goal is to have the exact same thing in both sets of parentheses. If you do, you can take those out because they're the new common factor, and once you've taken them away, what's remaining, 3x squared plus 5, goes in the other set of parentheses. So let's get some practice doing these kinds of problems. I'm going to take example 1 and break it into two parts. Now, between the two numbers, 2 is my smallest number, and it does not divide into 3, so I broke it apart. 1 has to be my greatest common factor right here. Between h to the 4th and h cubed, I can take out h cubed. The greatest common factor always has the smallest exponent between those two. So 3 divided by 1 still gives me 3. H to the 4th divided by h cubed leaves me with 1h. You are subtracting the exponents, but you can think of it as saying I've got 4 h's and I'm taking 3 of them out of the parentheses, so now I've only got 1. Negative 2 divided by 1 becomes a negative 2, and the h's cancel each other out. When you look at the next two terms, right here, my smallest number is 4. So if I break that apart, it's got to be 1 times 4 or 2 times 2. 4 does not divide evenly into 6, but 2 does, so that's going to be my greatest common factor. Now, if the very first symbol that you have right there is a plus sign, you're taking out a positive 2 for the greatest common factor. They don't both have the same letters, so there's no letters in my GCF this time. So I divide that out. 6 divided by 2 gives me 3 h's. Negative 4 divided by 2 gives me negative 2. The whole goal was to have the exact same thing in my parentheses, the 3h minus 2, so that I can bring that down as the new common factor. So once I've taken it out of both of those, what's remaining is the 1h cubed, and I just dropped the 1 right there, and the plus 2. So I'm going to put my plus 2. So look at number 2. Same type of problem. I'm going to break it up into 2's. When I'm trying to figure out what my greatest common factor is with the numbers, choose your smaller number, break it apart. That could be 1 times 5, but 5 also divides into 15, so that's got to be my greatest common factor. They also both have the y's, so I take the y squared because it has the smaller exponent. So divide both of those by 5y squared. That ends up giving me y minus 3. Now, for that second set of parentheses right there, the plus y minus 3, there is an imaginary 1 in front of my y, so that's actually my smallest number, so that's got to be my greatest common factor. They don't have anything else in common, not even the y's, so remember, it's okay for it to be a 1. I've got a plus sign first, so my greatest common factor is actually that positive 1. Dividing by 1 doesn't change anything, so it's still y minus 3, and I do have exactly what I want inside my parentheses. So what they have in common moves down, that y minus 3, and what they have remaining on the outside, 5y squared and the plus 1, needs to go in my other set of parentheses. Example 3. Same idea, there's 4 terms, so I'm breaking it in half. Just looking between 6 and 8. 6 is my smaller number, so I'm going to break that one apart into its factors. I know that 6 doesn't divide into 8, 3 doesn't divide into 8, but 2 does, so that's got to be my greatest common factor. They've both got a's, so I'm taking a squared because it has the smallest exponent. So make sure that you're dividing that from each one of those. 6 divided by 2 is 3, a cubed divided by a squared leaves me with 1a. 8 divided by 2 gives me a positive 4, and the a squareds canceled each other out completely. Now, looking at the next two numbers, I've got 9 and 12. 9 is my smaller number, so I'm going to break that one up into its factors. I know that 9 doesn't divide into 12, but 3 does, so that's going to be my greatest common factor. This time, however, notice that the very first symbol is a negative sign, so I need to make sure that I'm taking out a negative 3. Double negatives right here make this a positive 3a. Double negatives make that a positive 4. So now I do have the exact same thing in both of my sets of parentheses. So I'm going to take out the 3a plus 4. That's my first set. If I take those away, what's remaining is 2a squared and the negative 3. So those two are going to go together in the other set of parentheses. Now remember that the goal is to get the exact same thing in both sets of parentheses. If you had accidentally taken out a positive 3 right here instead of a negative, look what would have happened. You would have had almost the same thing in both sets of parentheses, but they've got the wrong signs. So if that happens to you, you know you probably should have actually taken out a negative. So example number 4. Same idea. I'm going to separate that into 2. I've got 2 and 6 for my numbers, so 2 is the smallest number. I'm going to break it apart, but 2 does divide into 6, so that's my greatest common factor, and I also have the x squared. So divide 2x squared from each one. 2 divided by 2 is 1, x cubed divided by x squared is x. Negative 6 divided by 2 gives me negative 3, and the x squareds cancel each other out. Now once again on this problem, my smallest number is 1, so that's got to be my greatest common factor. But notice that there's also a negative sign in the first term right there, so I've got to take out a negative 1. So divide each term by negative. That makes this one a positive x. 3 divided by negative 1 makes that a negative 3. Now I do have the same thing in both sets of parentheses, that x minus 3. So if I take that part out, what I have remaining is the 2x squared and minus 1. Last example. Okay. So the greatest common factor between 18 and 2 is 2. But remember what I said, the very first term, if it's negative, you take out a negative with it. So I've actually got negative 2x squared as my greatest common factor. So those divide and give me 9x. Those two divide and give me a negative 1. And now I'm looking at my other two terms. 27 and 3. The only factors of 3 are 1 times 3, but 3 does divide into 27, so I'm taking out a 3. Because the first thing I see right there is a plus sign, I'm taking out a positive 3. When I divide that, it also gives me 9x minus 1. That's exactly what I wanted in both parentheses, so it becomes 9x minus 1 times negative 2x squared plus 3.